Hello everybody, welcome back to Tin Man Collections, and today I'll be reading another chapter out of the Bigfoot Terror Tales, Vol.1. And this chapter is called A Forest of Monsters by Giovanna Lagana. I hope I ain't butchering your name, I'm sorry. But it starts off saying this. If someone screams in the forest, are their cries heard? Probably not, but anyway. Alright, but here's where the story starts off. Even though Jacob knew the answer was no, he continued to contemplate that very question for the uptenth time this hour as he checked his gold pocket watch. 2 hours has passed since he last heard the warrior cry from the beast, the cry that signified it would be coming for him soon. Well, what did you do to him, huh? That's weird. Was it toying with him? Most certainly. The circle of huge stones surrounding him and the smaller rocks scattered about were a clear indication of it. Each time he tried to cross the circle barrier the creature had formed around him, it would catapult a rock his way, stoning him in punishment. Punishment is believed he deserved. What comes around goes around, was a saying that he himself held true for over a year. You cross their boundaries, you're going to get punished, all right. But now that he was on the other side of the coin, he realized its meaning should not be taken in context, but in broad perspective. A lot of good the revelation did him now as the hour of death approached with a blade's edge so sharp it cut away at his sanity with every minute that passed. Combining his fingers through his grimy hair, he heard the growls of his stomach revolting against its forced fasting. 4 days had gone by since he last ate a decent meal. For all that time, he tried to eat leaves and plant roots he believed safe, and the water he drank was rainwater, collected on tree and plant leaves in his prison deep in the board forests of Canada. Ooh, that's a lot of wilderness right there. Anyway, he felt weak, dizzy, and cold. The damp autumn air made his joints ache. Leaning on the hard rock behind him, he tried to distract his mind from the pain, his pain and despair. What he wouldn't give for a piping hot cup of coffee and a warm stew filled with tender beef, morsels of vegetables. I'd probably say maybe on the coffee put something else besides stew, but anyway. The divine meal image he conjured in his mind suddenly turned to frayed, sagging flesh floating in a pool of fresh, vicious blood. He covered his eyes and bowed his head, trying to shake the horror away. He still suffered from the side effects even after a year. All the treatments, experiments, and concoctions he endured, and still the nightmares came back to him, whipping his psyche when he was the most vulnerable. They tormented him continuously, systematically forging in him what he should never forget. He was who he was, and no man or God could ever change that. That's what he tried to show Dr. Phillips time and time again, but the old stubborn scientist was blind to all his warnings and words. He belittled him in the lab each time they experimented on another subject. He tried reasoning with him on that these experiments would only fail and turn against him one day, but talking to a wall would have been more effective. He signed this was all the doctor's fault. If he had only heeded Jacob's warning, then he wouldn't be gone now. Leaving him alone with the beast in this deserted forest, as if on cue, a whistling sound pricked his ears. It was coming closer. Jacob rolled over, hoping to miss the catapult object, but too late. The fist-sized rock hit him square in the middle of his back. He screamed in agony, and his pain shot through his upper body, and the wind was knocked out of his lungs. Tears began to trickle down his cheeks. He slowly sat up. A cry of bitter revenge from the beast trembled in his ears. With fear and apprehension, Jacob peered into the dark green foliage ahead. Red, deadly eyes stared at him with acute hatred. "Oh, you did something bad." He's coming after you, but anyway. In the shadows, they were hauntingly demonic. Their owner, a cold, calculated demon born not from the fires of hell, but in a sterile white room, observed Jacob's every move and anticipated a counteroffense. He could hear its rage through its ragged breathing. A chill crawled up his spine as the image of a gigantic beast with sharp fangs pouncing on him and tearing his limbs off fermented in his mind. Pushing himself backward, he recoiled instinctively, trying to keep as much space between him and the temptatious monster as he could without passing the stone barrier it had made. Once he moved as far away as he could, he remained motionless, staring back at the creature, while it continued to taunt him with its own observant stare. Minutes passed, and each beat of Jacob's heart echoed in his ears, making his eardrums throb and pop. As he waited, his imagination wandered onto many futile and sometimes impossible ideas of escape. The question, if someone screams in the forest, can their cries be heard? Once again crossed his mind, only this time the correct answer came to him. Yes, they could. They could be heard by others, not humans though, for no other human remained in the vicinity. But the creatures of the forest could hear his cries, and they too would come and beat on him, as the beast was doing to him. They stone him to death in justice and then eat him, for he didn't belong here. And I do not want to be in that situation. Good God Almighty. Another whistling sound started out as a hum and got louder. A sharp stone struck him in the knee, smashing the kneecap and opened a huge gash. Cloth, skin, flesh, and thick, dark brown hair frayed in the air from the impact. Blood spouted out from the damaged joint, staining his ripped, beige wood pants from his knees down to his midskin. He cried in pain and cursed, "Blood! So much blood!" He knew all too well the scent of his blood would make the others come for him soon as well. Doom loomed over him like a thick, rough noose. Death's chime would soon begin to ring, and either heaven's gates would welcome him or the bowels of hell for his damnation. Only time would tell, and that time came faster than he anticipated as the beast came out from behind the dark foliage and charged at him with such speed he barely acknowledged its movement. It lifted its huge hairy hand the size of a small medicine ball and struck him across the face. Darkness encroached with bitter sweetness as he awaited judgment. It does sound like he crossed over the boundaries or something, but anyway, you shouldn't have done that. The far sound of pounding and glass shattering awoke him. In his grogginess, Jacob tried to focus on his surroundings. The white wall and the wooden table with all the metal instruments came into view. Slowly lifting and turning his head to the side, he noted he was chained to a wooden table in Dr. Phillips's lab. His first thought was the doctor placed him here. But he remembered the scientist was no longer there. Then who brought him here, and who was it trying to break into the building? The answer to the second question came before the first when he heard the moans and grunts of the creatures outside. They had obviously picked up his blood scent when he got wounded and followed his odor to the lab. Then soon would be upon him if he didn't break out of the confines and got out of there as quickly as possible. With all brute strength he could muster, Jacob tried to put his arm up and out, but the strong chain didn't break. He attempted to wiggle his thick wrist out of the cuffs, but it only caused chafing. Taking a deep breath, hoping another solution would come to him, he heard the door open and saw the beast walk in. Its bloodshot red eyes glare at him with hatred. It walked over to Jacob in a clumsy gait. It obviously hadn't become accustomed to its new, bulky, 8-foot-tall body. When it got close enough to strike him, Jacob recoiled, closing his eyes. He screamed, hoping part of its sane mind still remained human. Now, reading that, I'm trying to think, did they do an experiment on him, making him into a Bigfoot? I know that sounds kind of weird, but ooh. I'm sorry I did this to you, but you gave me no choice, he said. It stopped and just stared at Jacob. Jacob could see rashly trying to work behind his eyes. He continued to speak, hoping the part of its brain that still was human was listening to him. Didn't you see why I did it? Your experiments, they were getting worse, completely unethical, barbaric. Only God has the right to do what you did. What you made me do, you of all people know there will be repercussions. Look at what happened to you in London. It nearly cost you your life. It certainly cost you your career. The blood-red eyes widened as if its memory was coming back. Good. Jacob's reasoning was having an effect. Too bad it wasn't fast enough. How many minutes did they have before the creatures got in and came after them? If they got on them before they could escape, things would get ugly. Most definitely bloody. The image of shredded, blooded flesh floating in a pool of fresh, vicious blood once again returned to his mind. Jacob wanted to scream, but what good would that do? Taking a deep breath and adding a desperate tone to his plea, he said, "Look at... I had no way of knowing what was in the vial I gave you. I thought it was a sedative, certainly not the new strand of the experiment virus. I only wanted to knock you out to stop the experiment from continuing. It was cruel, and the subject was crying in agony. You once had compassion in you. I saw it well over a year ago when you took me in, gave me a place to live and work. When I had nowhere to go after what happened, don't tell me that compassion no longer exists in you. Look deep inside your soul and you'll understand my actions." It remained unmoving for a few seconds more, just staring deep at Jacob's eyes. What did it mean? Jacob prayed it meant it unlocked the chain cuffs soon and free him. But when his red eyes narrowed and it lifted a big syringe with green liquid in it, Jacob knew his ember of hope for salvation has just gone out. He tried to scream, "Please, no, don't do this, Dr. Phillips, I implore you." But his words fell on deaf ears. The mutant ape-like creature that had trapped him in the forest for days ago had gone, and intelligent vindication had turned it into a force of revenge and destruction. It stabbed the long, thick needle into Jacob's wide bicep with such force Jacob thought it had torn off his flesh. The hot contents of it slowly seeped into his veins as the creature tapped the needle, pushing down and ejecting the liquid into him. Heat began to spread through Jacob's limbs, making him shake uncontrollably. He closed his eyes as pain shot through his abdomen and dizziness overtook him. His breathing became labored. His mind was overwhelmed with all the changes happening in him as the virus the creature gave him began to take effect. At least he thought it was a virus. After all, that's what the mad scientist has been working on all this time. Jacob helped him with his secret experiments in the lab. A virus that would change humanity's immune system and make its body regenerative. That would be nice to see. Just like science fiction movies. It would make humans invincible against any type of injury, sickness, or disease. Dr. Phillips had started his research back in London in 1897. His research mainly involved vivisection back then, which meant cutting and experimenting on live subjects. when an interest group named British Union from the Abolition of Vivisection was created back in 1898. The backlash from its public protest made the people open their eyes to science unethical experiments. The domino effect from these protests rendered all of Dr. Phillips' work unacceptable and immoral. His funding ceased and his reputation was ruined. Members of the radical group even torched his home. He barely made it out alive before his cottage collapsed in a fiery heap. That's when he came to Canada, hoping to continue on with his research. In theory, Dr. Phillips' intentions had been notable in the beginning, but all the failed attempts in creatures, the virus, and his surgeries turned the subjects into made his actions unforgettable. Even though Jacob helped him and his assistant in those secret experiments, he tried to tell him that time and again this past year, but Dr. Phillips didn't listen, and look where it got him. And Jacob knew where it got himself. He was on the verge of dying. The sheer acuteness of pain shooting through his entire body he could barely endure. But even though the pain was excruciating, soon ice coldness started to spread through him, numbing him. It was then he realized the creature had removed the cuffs. The creature took his hand and pulled him. It grunted for him to leave. On wobbly legs, it turned over from the table and placed his feet on the floor. His legs felt like heavy stumps rather than his lower limbs. He half expected himself to falter and fall to the floor. But he braced himself against the wall and made his way to the door. A loud crash followed by shuffling sounds came from the other side of the room. The creatures had made it into the building and only a white tiled wall stood between them and them. Jacob expected to hear the beast, his old friend, follow him out, but it didn't. He slowly turned to look at it and saw it standing next to the table. It stared at him with wide eyes. Its eyes were no longer bloodshot but brown. Dr. Phillips was transforming from a hybrid Bigfoot creature back into his human self. Whoo, man. Something you see like in the Hulk or something. But anyway, could it be, he wondered. Apparently, the new virus strands' effects weren't permanent, as with the past strands that transformed the human subjects into the same huge primitive Bigfoot creatures that now hunt them down. Those creatures thirsted for blood. They could smell the scent miles away. The fact they had tracked Jacob down after he wounded his knee and bled was a prime example as to how successful their sense of smell was to the scent of blood. His blood, if he was still bleeding, they would still be able to track him. He'd never be able to escape them. He gazed. I'm going to save this for part 2, so here we go.